Hello everybody. You know me, I'm the classic comics man, Steve Keeter, and I've been writing and drawing and making comics my entire life. And that's 66 years, people. In the very early days, my mom, my dad, my Aunt Kathy used to read me comics on the couch. They used to read me Superman, Superboy comics, Batman. And this is, before I could read or write, And I was fascinated. In those days, the George Reeves Superman television show was still on the air. And so I used to watch that and just wish I could be this great soaring superhero with all this strength and all this power. Anyway, I loved comic books ever since I was very little. And I started drawing them from the very beginning. Unfortunately, my very early comics efforts have been lost through the years, through my parents divorcing, relocating, going to Memphis, coming back to North Carolina, and on and on and on. I'm in Florida now, but over the years these things got misplaced. Maybe one of my relatives might have some of those. My Aunt Kathy, perhaps? I don't know. Aunt Kathy, if you're watching this, if you have any of those old comics, let me know, because I'd love to have them. And but yeah, I was writing and drawing comics ever since I was very little. I felt that creative drive, and well, I don't have those. I have some other stuff, some of the stuff from when I was very young, and some of it has been, well, some of my friends in elementary school and whatever got a hold of some of this stuff, and drew a lot of stuff in the margins and whatever else, just kind of making fun of me, or just making fun of the story. They didn't get that I was trying to be serious. The artwork was crude. For instance, this. Here I am drawing the Wolfman, Larry Talbot, turning into the Wolfman. Here we go. Another one. I had a character called Captain Mysterio, and the Captain Mysterio, he's mysterious, right? And the Curiosity Kid. But you can see my friends have drawn all over and, messed the whole story up, messed everything up. So, they've screwed up the integrity of the story. With all this drawing, you can see that I was trying to be serious. I was trying to draw serious superheroes. But, they didn't get it. Because I think back in those days, people didn't get that you were trying to be serious. They didn't understand comics. In the early 1960s, people thought comics were kid stuff. And it wasn't. A lot of us were fighting for the integrity of these comics. And Marvel Comics and Stan Lee and Marvel Comics came along, and they were writing more adult comics with more serious themes and serious character development, relationships. And here's this one rather decent. Somebody erased my dialogue and put in some stupid dialogue, but here it was an action scene that I did sometime back in the 60s, 1960s. Okay, but I was giving it my best shot. So yeah, here we go, like that. I get a little further over this way, the light picks it up, a little better. So I was doing that, writing these stories in composition books. Before that, I had written stuff on notebook paper, a lot of stuff on just like lined notebook paper that my parents gave me. I even did color comics, SK comics, featuring the Masked Crusader, and Captain Mysterio, and some other heroes here. Wildflower, and the new Astro Boy. Yes, the new Astro Boy, as opposed to the old Astro Boys. My version on the great anime comic hero. And we have here the beginning, an origin story for the Masked Crusader. The origin story with my incredible 1960s artwork. Yes, Kirby had nothing on me, right? There I was doing my best at that time and using colored markers to, to color the stories. And I like this one, where he's part 1, and he shall fly. Well, you see right here, here he is in costume, looking totally out of shape, and he says, "Ah, my costume is a perfect fit." What if I move this camera over here a little bit, if I might get a better picture? What do you think? Let me see. Hey, it is better. There he is removing his mask and revealing that he's just some ordinary schmo, which is what I was, and trying to make comics because that's what I wanted to do. Here's Captain Mysterio in a new costume. Captain Mysterio. It was always exciting when a character got a new costume. So there is Captain Mysterio in his new costume. Very dramatic. You see that? You see all those lines surrounding him? Those dramatic lines? Yep. Captain Mysterio, by golly. Whee! What else we got here? I could go on and on and on. A little bit later, let me see, what's in here? Yeah, I even did a Avengers comics. I drew my own versions of Spider-Man. You see? Spider-Man. And the Avengers. Unfortunately, here's Daredevil. And this one, folks, was a pinup. There it is. That would be a pinup. You put it up on your wall, right along with Gene Colan and, the best of people who've illustrated Daredevil. Here's a page from a story where I have the Avengers battling the Hulk. There's Hawkeye, Giant Man, or Goliath, and they're fighting the Hulk. What do you think? Utterly professional. If they publish that now, we get $1 million for it. Yep, and there's the Hulk. There he is, folks. So I did all this stuff. And somewhere along the line, I did some other comics. But somewhere along the line, I started doing. Are you still with me? I started doing comics on bigger paper. I found paper that wasn't lined paper. It was just 20-pound bond or whatever. And I had this here. I published a Fantasy Illustrated. Fantasy Illustrated with Captain Agile and the Agility Kid. Has to be a kid partner, right? Captain Agile, the Agility Kid. There's a Solar Man, King Kong, Frankenstein, all kinds of monsters and heroes, because I was fascinated by monsters and heroes in those days, and I still am. One of my favorite magazines that I used to buy on the stands was Larry Ivey's Monsters and Heroes. So I used to buy that, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. It was published sporadically. It didn't always come out on time, but whenever I found an issue of that, I snatched it up. And here I am with sort of a remake of the origin of King Kong. Roar! King Kong is bursting through the giant gate to battle the people who dared to come to his island. Yes, indeed. Yep, here he is. He's picking up a ship. Yep. King Kong's a big guy. He can pick up a giant ocean liner or whatever, cruise ship, whatever. So you don't want to be on that ship when Kong comes along, okay? Because he can swim. And also in this, we have the origin of a character, my own version of a character, Starman. And there's Starman. Very impressive. The anatomy is absolutely outstanding. If you look like this, you'd be in serious health problems, no doubt. So, I got so much stuff here. Do you know how much stuff I have here, people? I got a lot of stuff here. I can't go through all of this, you know. I'm gonna bore the heck out of you if I do. I probably already bored the heck out of you. But somewhere along the line, I started doing. This looks interesting. My version of Famous Monsters magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, which had articles about monsters and stuff. And I had an article about. I was getting better by this time. I was getting somewhat better about Frankenstein and Boris Karloff, and you can see my artwork had improved by this point. Where I was copying illustrations, but I never traced them. I just copied them. I would have it down on the table, and I would just do my own, or just draw it by looking at it. I had a pinup of Dracula, and this being the psychedelic 1960s, it looks rather like Lugosi is on acid, right? But, yep. So, and I put a comic strip in this issue, too. And what was it? Let me see. My goodness. Well, there's a comic strip with a hero, and I can't tell who the hero is. Looks like there's a page missing, perhaps. X. It's the origin of a character called X. And, oops. Everything, you know what? This thing has attached itself. What happened, Steve? What happened? Earthquake, earthquake. What happened is it was a spiral. I was using spiral bound, a spiral bound notebook, and this particular right here, where this is hanging off, that snagged on my keyboard and it dragged it over that way. And so you saw the dramatic result. So it's totally dramatic, and I know you enjoyed it. So X. So we have a hero named X, and here he is. And he's escaping. I'm not sure what he's escaping from. Perhaps from the laboratory where he was created. Because I'd have to go back and read these. It was... I might have written this 55 years ago, people. But, there's high drama in this. High drama and action and special effects. There he goes, X. Doing whatever it is he does. Like I say, I'd have to go back and read it to see what the heck did he do. But he obviously had great power. Powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. And this story went on for a while because I see at the end of the story he says, I'm a human being, but I'm a robot. And he says, how could this be? How could this be? And this giant face appears in the sky. He says, I know how. And X says, it's the intelligence supreme. Ah, yes. If you have questions and you're not sure about something, you have to talk to the intelligence supreme. Obviously, that's who has the answers. So, and then I did more comics. Diablo. I had a title called Diablo, which was also like Famous Monsters of Filmland, where I put pictures of and articles about movie monsters. This is a scene from some Hammer film with a vampire, one of the Dracula, Christopher Lee Dracula films, obviously, and that was the cover to this particular issue. There was another version of Diablo, which had comic strips. And here I drew, and this is my artwork back then, folks. This would have been maybe around 1970, though, just before I started publishing small press comics, and I really got into it, Before I discovered small press, I was doing this stuff on my own. I didn't know other people were doing it until I read about it in an issue of Larry Ivey's Monsters and Heroes. I read about fandom and small press, but it was Edgar Rice Burroughs fandom, and that impressed me, and I got into I started ordering the Barsoomian, E.R. Beadham, and the Edgar Rice Burroughs fanzines that were mentioned in that magazine, and eventually that directed me over to Small Press Comics and the the fanzines and comics and zines that featured comic characters, and that's how it kind of all began. Here I am with Nosferatu on the cover of this issue of Diablo. So let me open this one up. I'll open it up real quick. So I had two zines called Diablo. They were never published. They were just, there's only one copy in existence of all of this stuff, and I just did them for me. I would let my friends read it, but they had to give it back. That was a mistake, because those are the same friends who went in and started writing stuff, comments in the margins and screwing stuff up, and I was so pissed off when that happened. A friend and I made a film back in when I was like 15 years old. A friend and I made an 8mm film, which has been lost through the ages. It has been lost. But my friend played, it's called The Werewolf Meets the Vampire. And I did an illustrated version of that. So there it is. It shows the transformation. My friend, and we used stop motion photography to show the transformation. And he was the werewolf, and I was the vampire. And we got into quite a battle. I'm sorry, folks, we don't have the 8mm film. We don't have the video, but we do have, well, I do have this old comic version of it. So, something we did for fun. I did a lot of stuff. I was just getting into, in high school, I was just learning about, well, I was first getting into small press. What can I tell you? Whew. Now this one's really ragged and really old. It's called Tales of Frankenstein and Others. Drawn on lined notebook paper, and you can see some people wrote wrote on it, but it shows some of my early monster artwork. I was in love with the Universal monster movies: Frankenstein, Dracula, the Wolfman, the Mummy, and all of that. I watched that stuff ever since I was little. And here we have the transformation. Man, I don't know when I drew this, but it's back in the late 60s. And you see Larry Talbot here transforming into the Wolfman. Excuse me there. Yep, I burped. By golly, I'm human. Not like the monsters in this story. And I wasn't afraid to go for a little bit of graphic horror. Here I have the Mummy ripping some guy's head off. Yep. Totally graphic there. Oh, what else? This video can't go on forever and ever and ever, so I got to find some highlights and just stick with that. Here's a point where, like I said, there was two different Diablos. One Diablo was like Famous Monsters of Filmland with articles, and then there was the other one. And by this time, my artwork was improving fairly dramatically, I think, over the early stuff. You can see some detail here. Yeah, there you go. So this issue of Diablo, this was Diablo number 2, the all Frankenstein issue, featuring a 2-part adventure, Curse of the Stranger. Let's take a look at this. And it was also drawn on, you guessed it, lined notebook paper. Okay, and there's that cover again. Diablo number 2, from perhaps about 1970, I would say. And 37 pages in all, it says. Let's see, let's just find a cool page, or a page that's acceptable to look at least. Yep. We have a guy who's investigating things, and he finds a hidden, forbidden temple. Yep, it looks like a forbidden temple to me, rather Egyptian. And it unearths certain secrets that there's like a giant statue, and this giant statue comes to life. You can see him there. He's pointing at the guy. He's saying, "Hey, I am a giant statue who's come to life." What do you think about that? You think it would make for a good comic book? And the guy says, "Yeah, it would make for a good comic book." Anyway, what happened was it turned him into a werewolf. So there he is. No kidding. After the transformation, werewolf, you betcha. So, I mean, there's more than one way to become a werewolf. You can get bitten by a werewolf, or you can find a giant statue that just wants to turn you into a werewolf. So that's what happened there. This is kind of interesting, because it was the adventures of Joe and Dora. And Joe was the good guy, but Joe's the guy who found the Egyptian temple and became the werewolf. But his wife was Dora. And this gets a little creepy, because it actually gets a little creepy. This, for me, back in those days, this is fairly dramatic. She's looking for Joe, and she puts the key in the door to his room. And you see here, she's like, "Joe, Joe." And then the next panel, Joe emerges. And he is a werewolf. And he does kill her. Arg. So, tragic, sad story. And, so yeah. And it goes on and on and on. A little bit later, this werewolf, Joe in his werewolf form, meets, guess who? The Frankenstein Monster. Yep. I love drawing these comics. You know what I did? I was in class. I was in high school back in those days, and I used to draw those when I was in class. If the class was really boring, I'd prop a book up or something so the teacher couldn't see what I was doing, but I had all this paper, and I'd be drawing comics. And I drew them panel by panel. I didn't have a script or anything. I made them up panel by panel, as I drew them. So, and that's what these are. These are these old comic books. Anything else you want to see? What do you think? Want to see something else? Let me see what else I got. Here you go. Here was the cover. Where you at? Where you at? Oh, you're over here. Here was a cover to a comic I never finished, with heroes. Actually had Nightman, my character Nightman, who continues to this day. Oh, this was in August of 1971. August of 1971. It tells you up there somewhere. Where's it at? Right there. August 1971. I had heroes Nightman, the Behemoth, and the Freak. And you see here, there's a big battle with a big giant guy. And that would be the Behemoth, I guess. And against the Freak. The Freak was kind of a hulkish character. Or maybe more like the Abomination. It was an old Sunwing story that I never completed. It was around the same time. Part 1, we have Sunwing being taken captive in an earlier... My character's Sunwing. You've seen him in my recent comics if you've been following my comics at all. But here he was in a story that I penciled. And the reason I never finished this story was because, as I said, I was just drawing comics for the fun of it in pencil. And around this time I met Chuck Robinson. Chuck Robinson II, who published Comique. And he told me, he was a teacher at the school where I was going to school. And, man, what was I, like in the 10th grade? And he told me all about small press comics. He heard I could draw. And, not that great, but he heard I could draw. And he talked to me outside of his English class one day, and we started talking about comics. and he started telling me how to publish a small press comic. In those days, we used a spirit duplicator. You turn the crank, use Ditto Masters, and which is carbon paper with a sheet of paper behind it. You drew on the paper, and it transferred to the carbon paper and onto a spirit master or a cylinder, and you turn that crank and it would print the comics in purple Ditto, living purple Ditto, which is what they used to print tests in high school in those days. So yeah, and here's some of my artwork at that time, just before before Number 1 came along, before I started doing my own, comics, small press comics that were actually distributed through the mail, and that's an early version of Sunwing. It's great. I never finished the story, but I did continue this story. I did another version of it and continued it in the pages of Number 1 being comic that I published back in 1973, and that was cool. That was fun, and it was a beginning, folks. It was a beginning. Anything else? I think that's just about enough. What do you think? Anything else I can pull out of here? This looks pretty goofy. Written, drawn, and edited by Steve Keeter. We have a mad scientist. This was a little bit earlier, okay? A mad scientist with his hunchback assistant. And the scientist is saying, "This is the moment I've been waiting for. It must happen today. Come, my slave, come. At last, the mummy shall live again." And, the little hunchback assistant says, "Ugh, org." I can't resist myself. I haven't looked at this in many years. Let's see what the mummy looks like. Let's see what we got here. Okay. I'm just waiting here. These old tattered pages. Well, guess what? Not only do you get the mummy, but you get the Frankenstein Monster and the Wolfman. So, there you go. How much excitement is that, people? Yep. So there you go. I will say, give away the end of the story. At the end of the story, the mad scientist gets his just desserts. Well, it looks like his hunchback assistants get pissed off. So there's the hunchback. And he throws something at the mad scientist, and the mad scientist, ends up being like, dead. It's fun to go back and look at these, folks. It's fun to go back and look at these. Now, this one I'm going to put on Facebook. The Adventures of Dot. I have no idea when I drew it, but it's kind of a stick figure comic. And this is before small press. And Matt Fiesel and everybody was doing stick figures. I did this one way back in the 1960s. It would have been the very late 1960s, maybe 1968. And I'm going to send a link to this on Facebook, so if you guys want to see it, just check out my Facebook. So that's what I was doing in those days. And sorry if I bored the heck out of you, but I found it interesting to go back in time and look at this stuff again. It was so much fun. I remember, I would go to school, in elementary school, 5th grade, 6th grade, 4th grade, from 1st grade, even before when I was a little kid, I was drawing comics. I often did stick figure comics in the early days, but I also tried to do my own full figure comics. They to varying degrees of success. I was coming along, I guess, eventually in the 70s as an artist, but there were so many other people out there in small press that were better than me that I abandoned drawing, and for the most part, I still draw sometimes, but and became a writer and an editor and a publisher, and I have been privileged to be friends with some of the finest talents you'll find anywhere, anywhere. Some of the greatest talents that you'll ever see, you know, have been my pals and my collaborators, and I salute you all. This is how it was at the beginning. If you want, you can do a video and talk about your beginnings, but this was my beginnings. You guys have a great day, and bye-bye.